right, next up we're going to step through all of the different menus. First one we're going to step through is the quick menu. As the name implies, you can get to things quickly. In the main menu, like the red, the blue, the yellow, so you have to dive pretty deep to find something that you need to change. So to access the quick menu, you can press the Q button over here, or let's get out of here, or you can actually hit the Q button on the screen. We've got a nice touch screen here with these cameras. Well, once you start using it, it's hard to go back to a camera that doesn't have a touch screen. So I might be doing stuff over here, or I might be doing stuff on the screen as well. Sometimes I go back and forth. Sometimes, depending on the lighting situation, the way the light's hitting the screen, I might not want to get fingerprints all over the screen, so I might not do that. I'll just use these buttons on the side. But sometimes, you know, when you're especially on the deep in the menu, you can get to things so much quicker using the touch screen. It's a lot of fun. All right, so the quick menu, just hit the Q button, and we're going to start off at the top. These are our different focus modes. I'm going to have a whole entire chapter on here, so I don't really want to spend too much time on this. But this is how you access your 3 different focusing modes. Next up, we can move our way down here. We'll just press this. This is our drive mode. Again, this is a photography related thing, but since we can shoot stills within video, I normally just set that to single shooting. So what happens if I'm shooting a picture to set automatic white balance, I don't want to have it on continuous and have it go shoot a whole bunch of shots when I only needed one. So I usually just leave it on single. Image quality, I think as the default, the way the camera came, you're probably on L large. I typically just leave everything on RAW. I'm mostly a RAW shooter, just photography related. Next one up is your resolution. We have different movie recording size. 1920 is another way of saying 1080. It's most commonly referred to 1080, and also this times out quickly. The next one down resolution wise is this 1280, and 1280 is commonly referred to as 720. So I don't know exactly why they put it that way, but you're going to hear a lot of people say either 1080 or 720, and I'm going to be saying those 2 numbers a lot. That's referring to this 1920 or 1280. So we've got 2 different, the first number is the resolution, and the second number is how many frames per second. This first one is 30. Keeps timing out on me. The next one is 24. So kind of in a nutshell, we're going to be dealing a lot more with shutter speeds and frame rates later, but in a nutshell, 30 frames is kind of like television. 24 would be something that you would see more like in the movies. Then we've got 60 frames and per second on the 1280. And then over here we've got a very low resolution, and I don't even know why you'd ever use a 640, which I think is also commonly referred to as 480. You bought this wonderful high-def camera. I don't know why you'd ever shoot at such a low resolution. So one thing really quick, if your numbers don't say this on here, if for instance it says 50, for the 720 resolution, we're going to get to that later, so don't worry about it for right now. Working our way down, we have the video snapshot. This is a feature that you can edit videos within the camera. Not going to be really discussing this because it could take a long time to show you how to put a video together, and it's like 4-second clips or 8-second clips. I haven't played around with it that much, but it's kind of a hassle doing it all on camera. You're better off just taking your card out, putting it in your computer, and editing in a nonlinear editor. Much better way to do things. You bought this wonderful camera. I don't know why you'd ever use the snapshot feature, so we're not going to be really covering that. The next one is this symbol up here is your return symbol. So if you click that, you'll get back to the normal mode. So the next one down is automatic white balance. We're going to have a whole entire course on this, how to change. And actually when we get into like the red menu, I'll actually show you how to custom white balance. But we'll have a whole entire chapter on just white balance in general. Next one up is picture styles. We're going to also have a whole chapter on this. You can select all the different picture styles. I'll be demonstrating all the different ones, contrast, sharpness, all that stuff later. Just basically right now, I'm just wanting to show you how you can access it quickly. And then the last one is the auto lighting optimizer. But quickly, auto lighting optimizer, for instance, can help you bring out the shadows a little bit. For instance, an example would be if I were to wear a hat and my face was in a shadow, and you didn't have access to maybe a reflector or better lighting, and you wanted to light the person's face up like my face with a hat on, well, then you could use auto lighting optimizer. I can't kind of tell you guys to stay away from it. I'd rather you guys learn how to light better than use that as a crutch. But if you hit this auto lighting optimizer and we hit the info button, we can actually unclick. What this says right here is disable during expo, which is manual exposure. So if I click the info button, I can actually disable it while I'm in manual exposure. And since we are going to be shooting mostly in manual, you can disable it so you don't bump this, for instance, and turn it on. All right, before we start diving really deep into the red menu, I want to talk about a little menu confusion you might have. So let me demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about here. I'm going to step a little bit ahead of myself, so I'm going to hit the menu button. And since we just talked about auto lighting optimizer, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set that to strong. And right now, the switch is all the way forward, so I am in the video mode on manual. So what now I'm going to do is I've set that to strong. I'm going to bring this power switch from video to on. So now I'm in stills mode. So I'm going to hit the menu again. Remember, we're still in strong. And so when we go to auto lighting optimizer, we can see that we're still in strong. So I'm going to go back and set it, well, just to double check, I'm going to set this to off. So let's go back to video and see if it changed. So we're in video mode, we hit menu, and sure enough, we're off. So stills and video are tracking quite nicely here. Let's try something else. So let's say we're in manual mode, and let's bring up the info button so now we can see what's going on. And let's just even things out really nice and neat. And we can see we're at 100th of a second shutter speed and we're at f10. So I'm going to go to stills mode and we see, oh, they've changed to be exactly the same. So if I change, let's say this to 125 and I go back to video mode, so I'm going to press it forward, push it forward. And sure enough, we're at 125. So stills and video attributes seem to be tracking not only the menu, but also the exposure controls as well. So here comes the confusing part. So I'm going to go back to menu, and we're still in movie mode, and I'm going to change our color space from sRGB, because the menu is giving us this option, and I'm going to change it to Adobe RGB. And so I'm going to go back to stills mode and hit menu just to double check, and sure enough, we're in Adobe RGB. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, we're tracking. I've got Adobe RGB in my color space for stills as well as video. So let's go back to video mode and take a video. Press the record button, press it again to stop. Now when you hit the play button and you hit the info button once, twice, you're going to get a whole bunch of more information about the video, some meta information. Shows you the shutter speed, the aperture, all the stuff for different stuff. And right here, look, it says sRGB. It doesn't say Adobe RGB. So Canon has given us a menu that we can access in video mode, and they're allowing us to change it, but yet it's not reflected here. So there can be a little bit of confusion. Not everything tracks, and this is kind of almost the only case I can think of that doesn't track. So if you look in the manual, like I have, all the Canon cameras, doesn't matter which one, DSLR, all of them cannot shoot Adobe RGB in video mode. They can only switch back and forth between the two in stills mode. All right, one more item before we start getting into the red chapter. And there's going to be a phrase I might use here and there, and that's baked in. I just want to tell you about it. So if I go to, let's say, RAW, and I'm basically telling the camera, hey, I'm going to do everything in post. I've pretty much got it. I'm going to take care of color tone, saturation, sharpness, a whole bunch of different stuff. If I go to the camera and I say, hey, shoot JPEG, we're shooting JPEG here, you take care of all this stuff like color tone, saturation, sharpness, and just bake it into the image. Well, movies or video in our case here, they are very similar to shooting JPEG. Both of them have the information baked into it. We can't go back and extract things out later like we can in RAW. A great example is picture styles. So if you've ever used like a program like Lightroom and you've shot RAW, you can go in and change like the picture style from neutral to, let's say, landscape mode. And in landscape mode, it's got much higher maybe higher contrast and more saturation, more sharpness. And then you say, well, I don't like that. Maybe I'll move to a neutral, which is a lot flatter look. So you can definitely do all that stuff, but the point I'm trying to make here is, with RAW, we have a lot of flexibility later in post. JPEG, we don't. And shooting movies is very similar. We don't have a lot of things to play with in post. We just can't go and change the picture style later. We just can't do it. So I'm going to use that term baked in, and what I'm going to be getting at and what I'm going to be showing you is how to shoot with this camera so you do have the most flexibility in post. All right, we're finally on to the red menu. We're going to start on the first page of the red menu. First one is image quality. I like to shoot RAW. This is just photography related. Next one down is beep. You have different options here, so you can enable it. So if let's go back in, we're in movie mode right now, but if we were to try to focus and I press the shutter halfway down, you heard a little beep once it acquired focus and it turned green. Also, when I move my finger around the screen, I can focus on different things. And you can hear the bloop, bloop, bloop. So basically, you go to the menu, you can disable the touch screen part of it, or you could disable both the beep when you acquire focus or when you're beeping around on the actual screen. To be honest, the shutter makes way more noise than any of the beeps do, so I just leave it enabled. Next one down is release shutter without card. It says on, but in here it says enable disable, which I think their nomenclature on how Canon did this is kind of backwards, but maybe they couldn't fit the word disable. That's probably what it means. They should probably just leave this, say this on or off. Anyway, enable or disable. So I can disable this. So if I take the card out, and you should power the camera down before you take the part out. If there's stuff on the card that you don't really care about, you can definitely take the card out while it's powered up. So I've taken the card out, and it's going to say no card in camera. So let's say that you can't see it, it's a sunny day, and I want to take a picture. Well, I'm pressing the shutter down and nothing's happening. So let's just go to stills mode, try to take and right here you're going to say no card in camera. So the reason they probably put that in there is you can write to the buffer and you're in a store and you want to test out the camera. That's probably have that there. Personally, I don't want to be fooled into knowing that I don't have my card with me, so I disable that. Let's go back to the menu. Okay, next up is the image review. Set at 2 seconds, which I think is way too short. So if I try to take a picture, you'll see it right here. It was pretty quick on how it reviewed. So let's say I set this from 2 seconds to hold. So when I take a picture, it's just going to stay up on the screen. I much prefer it that way. Whatever you guys like to do, just set it accordingly. I like to chimp. All right, next up is lens aberration correction. So if I go into here, we've got two different things, peripheral illumination correct. And if you don't know what that is, basically, like if you have a inexpensive lens like this 50 1.8, and I shoot it at 1.8, shooting wide open. I'll get to that term later. Basically, this one can have kind of a darkening around the corners or a vignette. And you can tell the algorithm in the camera to fix that for you. But I'll tell you, at least in my experience, the algorithm in here is not as aggressive as something, let's say, in Lightroom. Lightroom's a really nice editing program for stills. And I'm talking about stills here, and I'll get to video in a second. But if you take a look now, this is disabled in the camera. So I'm not telling the camera to fix it for me. So it's disabled. So here it is. You can see there's a kind of a darkening around the corners. And here is with using the Lightroom algorithm, and you can see it cleaned up the edges quite nicely. So now on the video side of things, I've done this test and using enabled or disabled, And to be honest, I don't ever see that big of a difference on the video side. So you can leave it enabled, disabled, doesn't really matter. You might notice a little bit of difference. The only thing I'll tell you is if you shoot at really high ISOs, like maybe 6400, and that algorithm is boosting the things in the corner, well, it's also going to boost the noise too. So I've found that shooting at really high ISOs, I'll usually disable that. Moving down, we've got chromatic aberration. So you can actually, again, it has to be a Canon lens. If you don't know what that is, basically it's kind of like purple fringing that you'll see on really fine detail. Like if I were to take a picture of a tree out the window and I zoom way in really close and a pixel peeping along the branches on the still side, since you have such high resolution, sometimes you can see that kind of purple fringing going on. Well, on the video side, we have much lower resolution. And again, this is one of those things I haven't really noticed much at all, even on a cheaper lens that does have some chromatic aberration. And then on the video side of things, when you zoom so far in to look at it, it's just a big mushy mess of, it's not as nice and pretty and detailed as you would get on the still side. So this is something you can leave on all the time, and I haven't really noticed it, degrading your image in high ISOs situations or anything like that. All right, next up is exposure compensation. So if we go ahead into this menu, we can actually raise or lower the brightness. Can we get darker or brighter? Now this only applies to when you're in a different mode, like an AV or TV mode, and you're trying to shoot video on that side. So I could darken the whole thing like 3 stops or lighten it like a stop. I don't know why you'd want to do this, because when you're in manual mode, and I've just switched it over to manual mode, and we go to exposure compensation, well, we can't change anything now because we're doing everything manually. So tend to stay away from that. It just don't go in there. It's not the best way to shoot. Just shoot on manual. Don't shoot on AV or TV. Auto lighting optimizer. We kind of talked about this already. So you can actually, instead of doing it in the quick menu, you could dive deep into the menu and do it this way. And again, if you hit the info button, you can disable it totally. Again, I kind of like disabling it, so I don't have to worry about bumping it. So going back, custom white balance. So really quick, what I'm going to show you is how to custom white balance. Let's say you're in video mode. You have an 18% gray card. There's white and 18% gray. Canon recommends that you use gray, is a little bit more accurate. That's at least what they say in the manual. You can use white. If you use something like a piece of paper, paper can sometimes have, let's see if you can actually maybe even see this, but sometimes paper can actually have a little bit of blue in it to make it look a little bit brighter. So when you're in the store, you buy that piece of paper, for instance, that ream of paper or whatever. 18% gray is quite price to start. So if I put this in front of the camera and I take a picture, once it locks on, come on, maybe I'm not far enough away. There we go. Again, if you're not seeing this, if you hit the info button several times, you might be seeing something like this. If I info button again, you'll see that what I took it at, hit it again, and we get all this extra information. And we can see that we shot it with automatic white balance. So it doesn't matter what picture style, or sorry, what white balance setting you're in, like tungsten, white fluorescent, or anything like that. Could be automatic white balance, because what we're trying to do is we're going to tell the camera what is white. And we're going to have a whole chapter on this, but I just basically want to show you how to do it. So we've taken the picture, now we've got to assign it. So basically in the menu, when we go back to the menu, we hit custom white balance and we hit set again, and it's going to ask us if we want to use this image. We say okay, and basically what it's done now is it's reminding us too, now we have to set it to custom. We say okay. So we've stored it to memory. You can pretty much delete that image off there altogether. It's still stored in memory, but we're not done yet. To actually, use the custom white balance, let's go to quick menu. Instead of changing it from automatic white balance, we're going to go to custom. And now that we're in custom, it'll be an accurate representation of the colors based off that 18% gray. Again, we're going to whole chapter. I've kind of got a little bit ahead of myself, but I just wanted to show you the technique on how to do custom white balance. All right, moving down is white balance shift. Here is a situation where you can dial things warmer. This would be warmer or cooler, or you could make it more green, or you could create it more magenta. So why would you use this? Since these Rebel line of cameras, you can't change the Kelvin like you can with a 5D Mark III or a 6D or a 60D. You can actually change the Kelvin. Let's say you're in a situation like this. I've got natural light coming in, and I've got two different soft boxes. Well, these soft boxes are great. They have fluorescent lights that have higher CRI. We're going to get all of this stuff later, but they give off a kind of a green bias. So what you can do, if you don't want a custom white balance and you know what you're using in terms of light bulbs, and I know that these give off a slight green bias, all I have to do is like do one click down towards magenta, so I'm going away from green. I'm pulling it away from green to magenta. Hit set, and then boom, you can see we've changed that. But to be honest, I'd rather see you guys custom white balance if you have the time. Again, we're going to be covering a lot more about this later. Color space, we've already talked about this. Doesn't matter what you have it in, it's always going to shoot sRGB in video mode. Picture styles, we're going to go through all of this later. But basically, to change things, you can change it obviously by moving it around like this. But you can also change everything else by hitting the info button. So I can change the sharpness, the contrast, saturation, and color tone right from here. So I can increase it or decrease it. So that's how you would change it deep within the menu. All right, next up is dust delete data. If your menu doesn't look like this, you are probably on the photography side. And if it looks like this, that means you're on the photography side. Push the button all the way forward for video, and then you should be following along what I've got. So dust delete data is appearing on the video side, but however, it's one of these items that really has nothing to do with video at all, because from I understand it, you can try to clean up your sensors the best you can, and if there's still dust, this will actually map the dust, and then you have to use software that comes with the camera called Digital Photo Professional, which I've never used, and it will help erase those dust particles. So I'm not sure why they're including it here on the video side, because it has nothing to do with video, because Premiere, Final Cut Pro doesn't have any of this information you can take in and get rid of the dust particles. So moving on, autofocus method. We've got three, like we talked before. This little smiley face with an L-shaped nose plus tracking is your face detection tracking, which we'll show later in our focusing chapter. The next one down is FlexiZone Multi and FlexiZone Single, and we're going to be demonstrating all these later. Moving down, we've got Movie Servo AF. So with this particular lens, this is an STM lens, the 18-135, and when you have a lens like this one, you can use it in a situation like, let's say here, I'm sitting in this chair and I'm shooting at a very shallow depth of field, and let's say I move a lot in my chair. Let's say I move forward. I don't have this on right now, so I'm probably going out of focus when I go forward. I'm probably getting louder in the microphone too. And as I go back, I'm probably getting out of focus. Well, what you can do with this, using this STM lens, is you can enable face detection tracking and have the stepping motor. STM is the stepping motor. It'll step in and out as you move in and out of the around the frame. So it'll constantly keep you in focus. It doesn't work that great, and we're going to demonstrate this more later, but for that to happen, you have to enable it. If you don't want this, and let's say you're on an older lens, you can disable it, because if you're on an older lens like this one and it's hunting around for focus, this one makes a lot of noise. And if you're using the microphone built into the camera, you can hear the and this one's a lot louder, for instance, than that one. Moving on, we got autofocus with shutter button during movie. I usually leave this on one shot. And basically what this is, let's see if I can demonstrate this very quickly. We'll go to movie mode, and it's only when you're trying to take a picture while you're recording. So I'm going to hit record. I'm going to try to take a picture. And then it finally took when you saw those three squares light up green. So I'm going to stop recording, go back to menu, and then I'm going to turn it to disable. So now when I hit record, it should take a picture right away before it gets to a focus lock, and it did. So I like to leave it on because I like to have things in focus. To be honest, I don't shoot pictures while in movie mode that much. It's pretty much never. But I guess if I did, I'd want it in focus. If you don't care, I guess you can disable it. It's kind of an odd feature. Grid display. I usually leave this on thirds, this on one right here. And to demonstrate this, you'll see a grid line appear on the screen. This is great for composition. Let's say you have the horizon or something that you want to put on one of those lines. It's a great composition tool if you're just getting started. The one downside, I wish they had an option for this, is when I hit record, the lines go away. I wish they'd have an option in the menu to allow that to stay on the screen if I wanted to, but they don't. Next one down is metering timer. So I think the default is either 4 seconds or 16 seconds. I don't think I've touched this since pulled this out of the box. Let's go with 4 seconds. So basically what this is, if we go back to, like we're about to shoot a movie, 1001, 1002. I didn't count fast enough, but it was about 4 seconds. This is our meter, and it's a great tool to have. And if you have a great tool, why not use it? So I just leave it on 30 minutes. So now this will remain on this meter. So it's a great tool to have. So I would suggest just putting it at the maximum. All right, moving on. We got movie recording size. We kind of already talked about this a little bit before. We've got our 1080, and I always refer to it as 1080 instead of 1920. That's 30 frames per second. It's 24. This is usually what I shoot at. And then we've got 720 at 60 frames per second. And we're going to do a lot. I use that a lot for slow motion, and we're going to be talking about slow motion later. And then the low res, which I have no idea why they include that. So there's another number here. It's this 2959. So if you have a smaller card, that number might be like 10 minutes. It's basically how much time you have left on the card, or how much it's allowed to shoot. Because some sort of European taxes or something like that, they've done it in such a way where the maximum you can do is basically 30 minutes. So if your card is much smaller, let's say you have a 4 gig card and you got in there, it might only say 10 minutes. So that's all you could fit on that 4 gig card at whatever size you've chosen. All right, next up is sound recording. The way it comes set is set on auto. So let's talk about the microphones that are built into the camera first. We'll do that first. So basically, when you're recording audio with this, you could set it on auto and let it do it all by itself. And that is okay if you're just using it as a scratch track. And if you're doing external audio on an external device and you're syncing them up later in post. Using it auto is fine. I know companies like Still Motion like to do that. Or what I prefer is actually to leave it on manual and then put it about right there. And that's just kind of a good compromise. It's still going to be kind of noisy because these cameras don't have the best microphone preamps built into them. So to control it, you just basically can cursor back and forth, or I guess you can actually use the touchscreen. Yeah, you can actually use the touchscreen. I keep forgetting that you can use the touchscreen. So anyway, the next one down is the wind filter. The microphone that's built into the stereo mics on the top, you can actually enable or disable the wind filter. And basically when you enable it, it's basically rolling off the low end a little bit. So, probably I'm going to guess everything below 100 hertz is rolled off quite a bit, so you don't get that noise into the microphone when a breeze goes by your microphone or a big gust of wind. I'd just disable that, and I'd rather do it in post. An attenuator, I don't know why you'd want to enable attenuation, but you can actually, if your source, let's say you're at a rock concert or something like that, and it's so loud it's distorting, then yeah, you might want to enable it. But to be honest, I don't use the microphones built into the camera that much. The only reason I use it is for a scratch track. I do use microphones like this. There's two microphones I use a lot. The Rode VideoMic Pro, very sensitive microphone, and therefore what I can do, let's go back to record level, is I will take the record level and bring this all the way down, and then I'll bring it, that turns it off, and then one click up, and then these microphones work really well. And then I have my wireless system is also the same kind of setup. And then I bring it into post, and then I can normalize it wherever I want, and it's a very clean, has very clean audio that way. You can do other ones if you want to get very expensive microphones that maybe not as sensitive and have an XLR input. You can go do like a Beach Tech box, or JuiceLink has a box. You can definitely do it that way and then plug it into the camera, or you can go to an external audio recorder. You can do it that way too. Lots of different options. But for the most part, the way I do it, right into the camera, because when you do it right into the camera, you don't have an external device to worry about, more batteries to worry about, more cables to worry about. Going right to the camera, if you can do it in that situation, can make your life a lot easier in post because you don't have to sync it up later. And the last one is Video Snapshot. Again, we're not going to talk about this because you should be really editing on your computer. All right, first up is protect images. So you can select images you want to protect, and then you just basically hit the set button. It can lock them. So let's go ahead and lock this one. Now, I want to demonstrate something for you because basically what I do is I shoot all the stuff myself. I handle all my cards myself, so I don't really have to worry about protecting or not protecting certain images. But let me show you something real quick, and we're going to get a little bit ahead of ourselves. So I've just protected that one image to format card, and I'm going to format the card. We're going to go to, we'll talk more about this later. So now I'm going to go to hit play, and I've got no image. So even though I protected that, image, it's gone. So if you format the card, protect image does nothing for you. So to be honest, I don't really do the protect image type thing because it's kind of worthless, because I reformat the card every time I use it, so it doesn't do me much good. Rotate image is photography. Erase images. So let's go ahead and take a quick image. It doesn't matter if it's a image like a picture or a video. So let's just create a quick video. So we can see it here. So go back to the menu. So you can select and erase images one by one. Just press the set button and it'll bring up the trash can. Real intuitive. Or you can do all the images in the folder, or all images on the card. Again, I don't really use all images on a card. I'd rather just reformat the whole card. You'll get less corrupted data that way, doing it like a clean format each time. So working our way down, we've got print order, photography, photo book, photography, filter. Creative filters only are compatible with stills, not video, so we can't use that. Resize is only photography. Histogram. So you have two different choices between brightness and RGB, and we're going to be explaining what a histogram is and how it works and all that stuff. But basically, you've already seen brightness already, so I'm going to demonstrate RGB. So if we go back and I hit play, you'll see that right here we've got an RGB histogram versus the other one, which is just like white and was just showing brightness. But we'll cover more of that later. Jump image. So on the main dial up here, you can make it do different things. So you can, as its default, it'll advance every 10 shots or videos or pictures, doesn't matter what. Or you could set it to just advance 1. Or you could do 100. Or you could do by date. Or, lots of different options. But the only one I ever use, to be honest, is either 10, or I will do movies. So let's say I've shot a whole bunch of pictures and movies, and I hand the camera to somebody and they just want to review just the movies. I'll just tell them to use the main dial and they'll flip through only the movies. All right, next up is slideshows. You can use this for videos. So I've got a video right here and I can press start and it's going to load. But if you're thinking that you can edit in camera and get the the start and end point for each clip and then edit it and do it for editing in camera and then take a slideshow and put them all together seamlessly, well, it's not going to work seamlessly. You're going to have like a half a second to a full second delay between one stops and the next one starts playing. So if you're thinking about using it that way, it won't work. I've thought about doing that myself sometimes when you've just wanted to plug it into a television set and show somebody without having to do any editing within a computer. All right, next up is rating. So you can rate images by using the up or down. So if I want to go up, you can see it's moving the star and the number 1 over, and you can create 5 stars. Now, this is kind of, you'd think it would be kind of a cool tool because you could rate your video clips, like, oh, that was the best take. And then you bring it into your nonlinear editor like Premiere Pro, and you could sort by the rating. Well, I've tried this and it doesn't work for some reason. I've tried sorting by rating and it doesn't work. Perhaps, I don't know, like Final Cut Pro 10 or something, this might work, but it doesn't work in Premiere, so I never use rating. Next one up is control over HDMI. You can enable or disable. Now, this works with, I believe what they're called, CEC TVs, and I'll have to check the manual because this is something, it says it may or may not work. So if you have a certain TV and you have a remote control and you connect your camera up to the TV with the HDMI cable, you can actually control the camera, going forward or backwards with your TV's remote. And it's got to be a CEC TV. But to be honest, I don't have one, so I've never tested it. I don't know if it works. The only other thing I can imagine is views by like a Atomos Ninja 2 recording device and display monitor above it, and you connect to HDMI. You probably will have to enable this. So moving on, we're in the yellow menu next. So select folder. You can actually create multiple folders. I personally don't ever do this, but let's say if you wanted to shoot a whole bunch of scenes, so you could create a whole bunch of different folders. And now that I have this one selected, and I go and take a video, and then I go back to the menu and select folder, you'll notice that now it's putting all the new stuff into that new folder. To be honest, I don't ever do it this way. I would probably, because when you bring it into your nonlinear editor or your computer, it'll be in separate folders. You can do it that way. I've never done it that way. File numbering. You got continuous. So this is kind of nice. If you count up, it'll count up from 1 to almost 10,000. Every digital camera does this. Once it reaches 10,000, it starts back down at 1 again. And it doesn't matter if you take the card in and out, you remove the battery or anything, it'll always just keep counting up to 10,000. Auto reset, so I could reset it all the way back down to 1 again every time you put a new card in. Or manual reset, I could manually reset it all the way back down to 0 or 1 again. That might be handy sometimes when you have a dual camera shoot and you're going to put them in 2 different folders and you reset them both back down to 1. Might be a handy tool. I personally just leave it on continuous. Auto rotate is photography related. Format card, so we've already done this once, but let me demonstrate one more different thing. If I hit the trash can, I'll do a low level format, and basically, if I remember correctly, it does something a little bit different to all the different sectors. There's a whole bunch of technical stuff, but basically Canon says if your card is running slow or is not operating quite well enough, you do a low level format and run it. It usually takes a little bit longer. It's not much longer. It's like I don't know. Sometimes it'll take like 20 seconds if you have the card full and it's a 32 gig card. But the regular format, if I uncheck this and I say okay, it usually goes a bit faster. That's usually the normal speed. And the other one, if it's totally full, will take a lot longer. 20 seconds, not that big of a deal. But I always reformat cards every time I head out. I think I've already said that before. It's a great practice to get into. Auto power off. So I've set this to 15 minutes because I'm just demonstrating this camera and I don't want it to turn off. But a lot of times I will set it to 2 minutes. That's usually a good, I haven't used the camera, I haven't touched any of the controls on it. It'll time out after 2 minutes and help save battery. So let's get back. LCD brightness. Now, one of the things, when we get to the exposure chapter, we're going to talk about this a little bit, but if I start changing the brightness, so for instance, a great example would be, let's say I'm in a very dimly lit room and I want to lower the brightness, I can do that. Or if, let's say I'm outside on a bright sunny day, I can make the screen very bright so I can see it. Well, the problem is you're going to forget that you've changed it. Because I used to do this early on. I'm like, man, it almost feels like I'm overexposing when I am, I came back inside and I forgot to reset this back down again. And if that's the case, you might make some exposure changes based off wrong information. So I always leave it on 4. That's just personal preference. But if you're outside on a bright sunny day and you can't see the screen, it might be something that you might want to try. Or you could just use a viewfinder like I've showed earlier. So next up is LCD auto off. This works for photography. So let me demonstrate it real quick. So if I block above the viewfinder, like if your head was coming in, you'll notice that it goes off. So let's go to the video mode. Let's say we're about to shoot a movie and we bring our head up to it, nothing happens because it's more of a live view function, and usually your head is farther back from the camera because you can't see the screen right up against the screen. So that's it's just basically a photography item. Time zone, we've kind of already covered this when we set up the camera. Time and date, we've done that. Language, we've done that. All right, video system, we've got NTSC and PAL. So let me demonstrate something to you that I would kind of mentioned earlier. If I go to PAL, and then let's say I'm just going to use the quick menu real quick because it's really quick. And if I go to movie record size, you'll notice something happened here. Before I was able to choose 720 at 60 frames per second, but now that I'm in PAL, it's at 50 frames per second. So if I go back and I change this to NTSC and I go to quick menu, and now you'll see my movie recording size, I can do 60 frames per second. So if you really want super slow motion and get the most out of your camera, and you're not really publishing to broadcast television, and all you're broadcasting or publishing to the web, to be honest, I'd leave it NTSC all the time, even if doesn't matter where you live. Just because what happens is, even though you shot it at 60 frames or 30 frames or whatever, and if you're like me and you just publish to the web, everything is going to get reconformed, retranscoded to 24 frames. So it's all going to end up that way on Vimeo, YouTube. And the reason they do it is because it's less computer intensive for the people that are watching, and probably takes less storage space for people like YouTube or Vimeo. All right, next up is our feature guide. This is kind of our nag screen. Let me demonstrate what that means. So basically, if I'm here and I'm in picture mode and I want to select anything, I'm going to get these messages that come up and kind of slow down my workflow. I'd rather not have them. So I'm going to turn that off. Just basically go by here and I can disable. So now when I try to move around, I can go right into that particular item and get in and get out quickly. So if you've seen all the messages that you want to see, you can go ahead and disable that. On the video side of things, it really doesn't affect us too much, but if that's been bothering you on the still side, you can definitely get rid of that. Touch control, you can enable or disable. So if I disable it and I go here, nothing happens when I touch the screen, but I really like having the touch screen, so we're going to enable that. All right, sensor cleaning. These do a pretty darn good job at keeping your sensor clean. So I would enable auto cleaning all the time. So basically when it powered up, powered down, it doesn't necessarily shake the sensor. It shakes the, I believe the high pass filter that's in front of the sensor, and hopefully shakes the dust off. So you can do it every time you turn it on and off, which is, I think, highly recommended. Because once you start getting dust spots and stuff on your sensor, your stills and your video, it's hard to edit around those issues. You can clean now, and you can clean manually. The clean manually does it a little bit longer. So if you're running into dead pixels, white pixels, red hot pixels, try doing this multiple times and try doing it in multiple positions of the camera, and you might be able to get some luck and get rid of some of those spots. Next up is our GPS device. You have to have an external device to actually do this. What I've seen before, I don't own one, but the Canon 6D has a GPS feature built into it, and it won't bring up the GPS information into a program like Premiere Pro, but it will bring it into like a program called Media Info. So you will get the GPS coordinates if you're doing a lot of scouting, for instance, and you want to know the exact place that you took that image. You could definitely use that for that type of purpose. All right, next up we got certification logo display. So pretty much skip that one. I guess they didn't have to mount the things on the outside of the camera. Custom functions. So we'll start off with the first one, number 1, which is 1/3 of a stop or half of the stop increments for exposure. And we want as much control over exposure as we can, so we're going to definitely leave that on 1/3 of a stop. Next one over is ISO expansion. So if you need more light for some reason, they've hidden this away deep within the bowels of the menu. But if you need to turn it on, you can. And what happens when you go to movie mode and hit the ISO button, you'll now have an H. So you can go past 6400 and go even higher. The reason they kind of hide this is because it's very, very noisy. I guess you're in a situation you really have to get the shot. You could definitely do this, but if I were you, I would just leave it off. Highlight tone priority. So we can enable or disable this. To demonstrate what highlight tone priority is let's take a look at with highlight tone priority off. This is just a video of out in the snow, and then here it is with it on, and you can see the exposure kind of changed slightly. Now I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself in terms of exposure, but here is the back of the camera with the blinkies on, and you can see a lot of the foreground snow is blinking black, which means that it's lost all detail and the whites are clipping. Now with the highlight tone priority on, in the same situation, you can see a lot less is blinking. It's just stuff up into the trees. So if we look at them not side by side, but one on top and the other on bottom, highlight tone priority on is on the top, highlight tone priority off is on the bottom. We can kind of see what it's doing. It looks like there's more contrast with the highlight tone priority off. So it definitely protects your highlights. It basically redraws kind of the curve, I guess, within the picture styles would be my best guess. And as it gets, instead of having a nice straight line going up to the highlights, it rolls off gently at the highlights. But the thing about it is when you're in your ISO mode, so if we go ahead and enable this, and then we go back to movie mode, and then we press the ISO button, you'll notice that it says auto D+. You're going to see D+ everywhere, so even on the still side. But you're also going to notice that we've lost our ISO 100. So to be honest, I don't use that hardly at all. I can't even remember the last time I've tried using highlight tone priority, except for some of these examples. And I just don't like the way what it does to the exposure and stuff like that. So I basically just leave it off. All right, next up is autofocus drive. We can skip this, photography. This one's photography. This next one you could kind of use, but again, this would only work if you were in like shooting video in the AV or TV mode. Since we're not, and we're shooting it all in manual, then this really doesn't pertain to us. But remember when we pressed the button, the star button, we could lock the exposure. Well, you can use some of these, this feature set to do stuff in AV and TV mode. But since we're not, we can go ahead and skip this. Operations other. So you can set the set button, the one right here, to do a lot of different things like change the image quality, flash, menu, ISO. We already have an ISO button, so I don't know why you'd want it on the set button as well. To be honest, I just leave it on normal. Next, LCD display when power is on. So really quick example, because maybe you've run into this and you're really confused. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this to previous display status. The best way to demonstrate this is I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to actually picture mode, and I'm going to hit the info button. And remember, as we hit the info button, we can cycle through different type of screens. One of them is blank. So if it's blank and we turn the power off and we turn the power back on, it's going to clean the sensor, but then it's going to go right to a blank screen. So if you've ever run into the situation, you're like, my camera's not working, it's because you've set it to blank screen. So to be honest, I always just leave this on. All right, moving on to copyright information. So you can enter author's name, copyright details, and what's really nice about these touchscreens, you can just start typing. It's wonderful. And when you're done, you just say OK. OK has been selected. The setting will close after saving. I say OK. So you can display the author and the copyright. You can do the copyright. You can delete it. Whole bunch of different things. I would recommend putting your copyright information in there because that gets attached to all your still images. Clear settings. So you can clear all the camera settings, you can clear the custom functions, or you can cancel. So you can pretty much send the camera back to the way it came out of the box. Kind of. Some things are going to still be there, like the firmware is going to be still the same, that where you last left it. The time and date will be still the same. And I think that's about it. And then if you need to clear all the custom functions, you can do it from here as well. All right, next up is firmware. So you can actually update the firmware on this camera if you need to, if Canon comes out with some new feature or they correct something. Basically, you go to the website, you put it onto an SD card, and then you take the SD card, you put it into the camera, you go to this page, and then it'll say, hey, I detect that you have a card in here that's got new firmware on it. Would you like to install it? Just basically make sure your battery is totally full and then go run the update, and then you will have the most current software. All right, next up is My Menu Settings. To be honest, I never use this, but you can create your own menu, this green area. So basically you can register. So there's something like you like to control, like let's say the beep, and you register to the menu. So now when let's go back to the menu. And so now if I'm cruising through the menu and I get to the green menu, you'll see that beep is right there. And so we can quickly change it. Let's say if you want to turn it off for whatever reason. So you can fill this up with your own menu items in the order that you want. You can resort them and all that stuff. So to be honest, I never use that. So that's pretty much it for all the different menus.